Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. As you likely know, the origin of this collaborative is the governor's executive order that was issued last summer. The order does not dictate a particular method or approach to doing this work. It leaves that to the individual communities based on the relevant factors in their communities. In Troy, we had a number of efforts underway prior to the executive order, and I felt that it was important not to lose momentum on those matters. Felt it was important to get them completed or well along before embarking on this exercise. At the same time, I don't see that reinventing or reimagining is an event as much as it is a process. I am therefore approaching this as an exercise that does not conclude once the report is submitted to the state. In some form, it will be ongoing and organized dialogue among those in the criminal justice system, mental health, substance abuse, and the community at large. I think that's an absolute necessity if we are to build an enduring trust and effective responses to the needs of our community. So this PRRC is but one step in a process that started well before the summer and will continue well after April 1st. As it happens, the chief and his leadership team have been engaged in a series of changes in the department since they assumed their respective roles. Much of that work was done this summer. For example, we reworked our use of force policies. They are consistent with the 8 Can't Wait principles. We've reworked our discipline policies so that they link more seamlessly with the newly reconstituted Police Objective Review Board. We've completed the state of New York accreditation process, of which only about 30% of police departments in New York State have accomplished. It is one of the governor's recommendations. We have actually been accredited for 20 years, and we went through the reaccreditation process again this summer. We reinstituted the Emotionally Distressed Persons Response Training, EDPRT. This is an intense 40-hour training. We are all mindful of the tragic incidents around the country this year between police officers and individuals in emotional or mental distress. We want to make sure our officers have the right tools for those sorts of situations. We held our last class in December. About 50% of the department has completed that training, and we have 2 more sessions planned for this year, 2021. We've rewritten policies and procedures for the Objective Review Board to ensure that it will be a citizen-led initiative, and we have recruited new members for the board. We are on the cusp of deploying body cams. These cameras have been acquired. They're being set up, and officers will undergo training, I think, beginning this week. If not this week, it's next week. So we've begun the work of reform and reinvention, and so now we move on to building on that work. At this time, I would like to introduce our police chief, Brian Owens, to say a few words. Chief.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Owens. I'd like to thank everyone for being a part of this meeting tonight. Some of you may know me and Deputy Chief Dan DeWolf personally or professionally. We have worked closely with people throughout the neighborhoods of Troy for many years, and that has continued in our current roles. The Troy Police Department is a full-service, New York State accredited law enforcement agency. Some of you in this meeting have likely interacted with the men and women of our department, whether in the ordinary course of your life, as a result of a call for service, or during a serious incident. We are fortunate to have caring members who are willing and dedicated to serving others. We demonstrate this through our actions and attitudes every hour of every day during thousands of interactions each year. There are countless instances of our members offering life-changing and even life-saving assistance to people we encounter. We are grateful for the strong support of our community members and strive to not only keep people safe from crime, but also help people in ways big and small. We're also fortunate to have our partners on the committee, and especially thankful for the people and resources that those organizations offer to the people of Troy and beyond. While this meeting and the others that we will have are in the context of New York State Executive Order 203, the Troy Police Department has had ongoing conversations and collaborated with our community, including the neighborhoods and organizations represented by the speakers and committee members for many years, in some cases decades. We have evolved over time to better serve the people of our city, and we welcome the ongoing dialogue to find ways to improve as a police department. We also look forward to continuing to listen to members of our community on ways to address issues of crime, disorder, and injustice. Our goal is to make Troy a healthier, better, and safer city. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. The purpose of these meetings is to receive input from the community. But this is not the only and maybe not even the best way to interact with the committee. We strongly encourage written comments which will be shared and will become part of the record of the committee. Tonight's meeting is not open to the general public for comments. It is reserved for two affinity groups, the Reimagine Troy Community Service Work Group and the Justice Center of Rensselaer County. These are groups of individuals who have a particular interest in the subject matter and have been working on it been working on recommendations for some time. We are particularly interested in giving these groups an opportunity to share with us the benefit of their thinking and discussions on these matters. Please understand the committee is still in a listening mode. No conclusions have been drawn at this point, and none will be until we conclude these listening sessions. I'd like to say a word about the committee. The members on this committee were chosen because they bring experience either in the criminal justice system or because of their work with those who frequently interact with the criminal justice system. They were asked to serve on this committee to help us imagine how ideas brought to us by the public might be actualized to create greater transparency and trust, leading to a more welcoming and safer community for all. I know that not every interest group in the community has a representative on the committee, but every interest group has been invited to share their thoughts and ideas with the committee. The intention is to put those thoughts and ideas in front of a group of people who can help make them a reality. The design of the committee was intentional, small enough to be nimble, but positioned well enough to help us pull the levers necessary to create real change. Finally, I'll remind you again, there are a number of ways to communicate with the committee. Public meetings are only one. We encourage written comments that can be mailed or emailed. All the written material would be shared with the committee and become part of the public record. So if public speaking isn't your thing, where there's not enough time to get everything across to us, please consider submitting in writing. Again, I'd like to thank you all in advance for your participation and your critical thinking. At this time, I'd like to introduce our facilitator for these meetings, Tamara Gatschel. Tamara runs her own company called Creative Cadence. And over the years, she has worked a good deal with Fred Miller of Khalil Jamison, a Troy-based consulting company. Many of you may know Fred. Tamara has been extremely helpful to us in bringing this together. So at this time, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Tamara.
Thank you, Mayor. It's good to be here with you tonight. If we could just take a look at the meeting agenda. We just had our welcome from Mayor Madden and from Police Chief Owens. I'm just going to cover quickly some process guidelines, and then we will go into two affinity group meetings. Both of those affinity group meetings will have 40 minutes. If we can just go to the next slide, John. Each of those affinity meetings will have 40 minutes. It will be a combination of time for a presentation and then also an opportunity for the committee to ask some clarifying questions and to follow up on what is presented. And then what we will do is at the end, we will go into 15 minutes for the committee to do some debrief before we get ready for our next meeting on Wednesday. So just a couple of process notes. It looks like we've all done this, make sure that everyone is muted when you're not speaking. You can do that if you're dialing in with *6 to mute and unmute. As the mayor mentioned, there will be no public comment at this meeting, but there are two upcoming public forums, February 17th and the 22nd. They will both be held from 6:30 to 8. You need to register if you want to attend via Zoom, and if you want to speak, you need to fill out a form, and you can see that the website is there. An important note, you need to fill out that form by 3 p.m. the day of the forum if you'd like to speak with the committee. The affinity group meetings and the public forums are being live streamed on YouTube. They're also being recorded and will be posted on the website. So if we go to the next slide, the questions that the committee is interested in learning more about are posted on the website. And then you can also see how you can email the committee or send in information via postal mail. So at this point, it is 6:45, and so we will have 40 minutes for our first affinity group. We'd like to welcome the Reimagine Troy Community Justice Services Working Group. We're glad to have you here this evening, and I will turn it over to you.
Good evening. I'm Sue Steele. I represent District 3 on the Troy City Council. And I'd like to begin this evening's session by providing you with some background on the formation of the Reimagine Troy Community Justice Services Work Group, which we'll call the work group from now on. It was established by the City Council in July, following Troy's impressive and peaceful rally for Black Lives in June and Governor Cuomo's Executive Order 203. The council adopted a resolution that acknowledged racism and formed a work group of citizens to begin conversations on racial equity in policing. The governor's executive order made it clear that the responsibility for development of police reform and reinvention plan rested with the chief executive of each municipality. Still, the city council felt it important to take advantage of the energy following the rally and begin citizen-driven conversations. The hope was that the council work group might coordinate with the mayor's group. The Reimagine work group consists of volunteers who came forward to give time from their busy lives to focus their passion and interest in reimagining the way our community provides fair and just public safety services for all. The work group is very diverse and brings a great breadth of knowledge and skills. To be clear, the group is not steered or directed by the City Council, but is independent. And tonight's presentation is a result of the work of these very dedicated citizens. I think we'll now move on to our agenda. Tonight, the presentation will provide the following items: trust in policing, PORB versus pork, a timeline, recommendations, city current efforts, the PRRC process, status of City Council's working group, the time for reckoning. And we'd like to ask that folks hold their questions until the end of the presentation. And so now at this point, I'd like to turn it over to the members of the Reimagine Troy Community Justice Services Work Group. Thank you.
All right, so I've witnessed and endured the brutality of police many more times than once, but of course I cannot prove it. I cannot prove it because the police department investigates itself quite as though it were answerable only to itself. But it cannot be allowed to be answerable only to itself. It must be made to answer to the community which pays it, and which it is legally sworn to protect. And if American Negroes are not a part of the American community, then all of the American professions are fraud, said by James Baldwin. We have to confront brutal facts about the current reputation impact policing in America.
Jerry. Jerry, you're muted.
Okay, how am I now?
Gotcha.
Okay, sounds good. Just wanted to say good evening to everyone. Mayor Madden, certainly our paths have crossed on many occasions while I was working at RPI. Chief Owens, good to see you again. I'm in and out of the city, but it's good to see you again. And certainly we had a really, really good working relationship while I was at RPI, and Chief DeWolf as well. Just let me, before I talk about trust in policing, talk a little bit about my background. From many standpoints, I think I've been on both sides of the aisle. I'm the senior citizen of the group, as I was saying earlier. 48 years in public service, public safety, policing. 23 years with the Port Authority Police Department of over 2,000 officers down in the New York, New Jersey area. And I was chief of that department, second to the Commissioner of Public Safety when I retired. Spent 10 years chief of campus police, City University of New York, 5 years AVP for worldwide global security at NYU, and then 10 years at Rensselaer. Again, just many, many years, I guess, around for so long, things just kind of stick to you. So part of the work of our group, and certainly these are difficult conversations to have because we talk about race and we talk about how police police the community. And it's difficult. We see it from different vantage points, but I think what works in our favor is that we have a common goal. And the common goal is to have the best safety services for the Troy community while treating everyone with dignity and respect. You know, I'm familiar with a police culture. Police, we're different. And I say we're because I was a police officer for so many years, and we see things a little differently. And that is not unlike any sizable police department across the country, any department of 100 cops or more. And the way we see it is us against them. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Well, maybe I should say it's wrong. It's just not us against them. It should be the police working in unity with the community. We see ourselves, we're the heroes. We go running in when everyone else comes running out. But to that is what we signed up for. I mean, we signed up to run in when everyone else runs out. And maybe because we do it so much, we just have an opinion of it, again, that we protect our own. Sometimes we circle the wagons. I think that notion has to change. And it's not going to be easy, but somehow, some way, maybe fruit that is easy pickings we can take care of first, and the more difficult tasks over time. But policing is changing all around the country. I am a member of the International Association of Police Chiefs of Police, and the last magazine talks about reimagining policing. This is something, again, that's nationwide that every department in the country is talking about. What struck our group is something maybe low-hanging fruit that can be addressed. Wait a minute, my plug came out. I've got to reconnect here. Okay, I'm back. The police cars for the Troy Police Department. On the side of every car is STP, and I believe it stands for Service, Trust, and Professionalism. The thought of our group is that possibly we could reimagine that logo, reimagine that symbolism to spell out the word trust, taking the middle word from those three words and use trust. And the trust would stand for, the T would stand for transparency. A community feels in many cases that the police are hiding something or holding something back. Transparency certainly is a must for trust. The R would be for respect. Obviously, everyone should be treated with dignity and respect. And I've always said to police officers that I've managed out on the street is that you better give respect to get respect. Certainly you don't come to a fire with gasoline, but you come with water and you try to put it out. Many times it just blows up right in your face when you get there. So, well, okay, then you have to manage it differently. And I get it, the gang violence, gun violence, domestic violence, police have a very, very difficult job, and they owe it to themselves and their families to return home at the end of every single tour the same way that they started, and to do the things necessary to make sure that their safety is upheld. Let's go to the third letter, the U. unity. And it's a coin, a two-sided coin. Police on one side, community on the other side. To have value, though, both sides must complement each other and work together as one. Let's go to the S. The S is for service, and again, that takes one of the letters that are presently on the police cars, and obviously the highest level of service, a responsible police service, is what is always wanted by community. Last, not least, truth, openness, honesty. It's always the right thing to do. So if you take those 5 letters, TRUST, trust, and you break them down as I have, as our group has, it's something that we think that could certainly be helpful towards better relations between the police and the community. Now, obviously, this is not etched in stone. I like the word trust, but if there are words that you'd like to insert that work a little better than the ones that we've come up with, certainly, I think this is a project that's open-minded and evergreen. And I think the more input that we have from all of the different directions, community included, the better off we will be. And then if we decide to adopt this, maybe some type of campaign where we would unveil this is what we're looking to do as part of reimagining police services in Troy.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Jerry. Perfect.
Okay, that's, move on to the next person, please.
Thanks, Jerry. Linda is going to talk to us now about the quorum.
Good evening. We have recommendations concerning the Troy Police Oversight Review Board, as constituted as the Police Objective Oversight Committee that I was a part of. I was appointed by the Rosamelia administration to the committee in 2013 through 2014. And in that time, I noted that the Police Oversight Review Committee was controlled primarily by the police union representative, the Troy Police Internal Affairs representative, and the Corporation Council for the City of Troy. Our group could make recommendations to the administration primarily in the form of annual report each February. Number 2, the incident reports we were able to review were heavily redacted. Number 3, the attitudes of the Troy PD were not open or receptive, much to what Jerry was saying often happens. I saw that the Police Oversight Review Committee was hamstrung both by the language of the city charter and an overbearing control by Troy PD. When I spoke to Officer Fitzgerald about my role representing members of the community who were afraid their children might not survive an encounter with the police, his reply was that the concern was urban myth. Soon after, I resigned, and the officers at first refused to meet with the remaining members of the committee. We had been warned that if any of us went to the media, they would no longer cooperate. I was approached several years after the committee had disbanded and was told I was correct in my assessment and that many of the members had felt intimidated by the police. This was not the first time the committee had fallen apart in Troy. Our job on the work group is to make recommendations. These include the need for a different model for police oversight, which would give the committee members more equal influence with the Troy PD. The committee would need to be able to advocate effectively, have tools to accomplish this work, including a possible funding base. Whether a model could include means for good communication, not only to the administration, but back to the community, is not for us to know, but to imagine, since this is the exercise. We have heard that Mayor Madden has changed the name and rewritten the language of the Police Oversight Review entity. How is it different? Will the public be able to see how this new board has power and how it might benefit the public safety needs of the city?
Thank you, Linda. Going from establishing the role of policing and what it means and trust in our city and understanding the history of oversight that exists, we can start to look more historically at the events leading up to this historic year. And it's notable that in 2014, during the Kokopelli incident, Troy called for action. The community was vocal. They asked for discussions. And to my knowledge, it was not productive. It did not lead to change, even though there was a very large outcry. And there was blaming at that point. May 2015, 2 PT officers were found guilty in tasing, pepper spraying, and subjecting John Larkins to excessive force. In 2015, there's the Sean King public post that went out on Facebook noting that there were 2 boys who were handcuffed on the streets of Troy. You can see Congress right there for fitting a description of a robbery. And then there was a joke about them, I believe, possibly getting arrested for jaywalking when they removed the cuffs. Also in July 2015, Troy City Council approves payouts for 2 victims of excessive force, including Larkins and also Washington. Then in 2016, April Edson Thevenin is killed during a DUI arrest. And the headline at that time is Waterville man responsible for own death in police shooting. Body cams at that point are proposed, supposedly costing $75,000, 25 cams and 4 dash cams. Again, that's June 2016. It's now 2021. I believe this quote is also that by 2016, 50% of police departments had already instated body cams, and it was expected at that point that from the community members that police would be wearing them. So we are well behind the trend at this point. In August 2017, Dummy McDonald is shot in a moving vehicle. Also, December 17, attorney Abel Love's indicted for covering up the killing of Edson Thevenin, repeatedly interfering with the investigation. In January 2019, Comatali resigns after multiple accounts of bad conduct, costing the city $174,000 in settlements across, I believe, 4 different incidents of excessive force. Also in that month, a judge tosses the case against Comatali because Abel Love failed to meet the 90-day window for the indictment. In the same month, the Troy City Councilman is on record with a voicemail with a racial slur. That same year, Troy begins testing body cams. And then we see stickers start to sprout around town with white supremacist messaging on them. We see the rise in our country and the embracing of white supremacy. We know what happens from there nationally, but we want to talk about Troy. In August of 2019, the internal probe against Sergeant French comes back showing, I believe, 4 counts of misconduct and that he lied. In September 2019, protesters make demands of City Council asking for justice. To my knowledge, those are ignored. In February 2020, Abel Love sends sealed court documents through his private email, simply demonstrating the ongoing corruption and negligence of our local government. We still don't have body cams, although the city says that it is being finalized. Then in June 2020, the Troy Rally for Black Lives, with 11,000 people peacefully marching through the streets after a week of fear, leading most of the city to board everything up. Then the Police Review Board is named. Troy gets funding to restore the 100 city cams, still no body cameras. Also, on the state level, at that point, we see our state leading the country and looking to repeal 50A, banning chokeholds, prohibiting false race-based 9/11 calls, and making the Attorney General the independent prosecutor in killings of unarmed civilians by police. Cuomo also issues Executive Order 203. Our state is leading where our city fails. In October, Black Troy police officer Christopher Johnson alleges systemic racism on the force. I believe the filing was earlier in March and went unaddressed in the department.
So I think it needs to be acknowledged that we would not be having this conversation right now, instigated by Executive Order 203, if it were not for decades and decades of work by grassroots movements led by Black and Brown and Indigenous leadership, the voices of those most impacted by systemic racism and police violence. As Jerry shares, reimagining policing graces the cover of Police Chief magazine, but that's because of these movements who have been pushing and sometimes risking one's own life and well-being to make substantive change. We will discuss the timeline and the process that the mayor and the task force has designed later in this presentation. But we want to note now that there are voices in Troy that we feel have been deliberately suppressed in this process. Troy for Black Lives, DSA, Equality for Troy, to name a few, have all been putting out their voices, voicing ways to make changes. And Troy for Black Lives was one of the organizations that, organized this June rally that we in Troy are also proud of. The makeup of the committee not only most strongly represents the voice of law enforcement and the criminal justice system, not only lacks representation from those most impacted by systemic racism and police violence, but also does little to encourage and include these voices of grassroots movements who have pushed the critiques that bring us here today. It just really needs to be hammered home, I think. So there's much that we could recommend. There's much that we could point to that has been raised in other municipalities by many who have been engaging in this analysis, research, and wrangling over police policy as it pertains to the well-being and safety of communities for decades, including those that are coming out of municipalities as a part of the executive order process, as many of them have already turned in their reports. We will highlight here instead, and we will hand off recommendations following this meeting, but we will highlight the recommendations that have been put forward by a number of groups here locally. Troy for Black Lives has a list of demands, and I'm just going to highlight some things through these for the sake of time. But I think we need to say that people are fighting to make it home in any interaction. They're fighting for their children's lives. And there's a real trauma that sort of shapes and holds the lives of many of the people who live in this community. And in particular, in cases such as Edson Thevenin or the case of Demeke McDonald, where there is a silence that permeates the process and doesn't make room to say that we want to talk about what this trauma means for the people who are living in the city. Many are saying a newly formed civilian review board, and Linda has talked about one with subpoena power, one with proper representation of those most impacted, a full and impartial investigation of every instance and use of deadly force by a police officer, the disentanglement of county government with ICE and making Troy a sanctuary city, and the appointment of the Attorney General or another independent investigator or prosecutor in all cases of the use of deadly force by police officer. There's a great deal of distrust, particularly as we watch how DA Abelow handled the Thevenin case. And I know that there's many on all sides of that case who are not happy with how that went. And then the exploration and creation of diversion programs and investment in community support programs. You can move to the next slide. Troy DSA has a list of 10 points, which fall very much in line with what Troy for Black Lives has brought forward. Looking at budgets and hiring, getting police SROs out of schools, looking at the militarization of police, which has been happening over the past number of decades, the flooding of money to provide weaponry and enhanced weaponry for police. What has that done over time to policing? Redirecting the funding to mental health, affordable housing, and social services. We hear that from all sorts. When you look at the Time for Reckoning interview, even Carmela has brought it up. The mayor talked about it. Creating again. So a number of these are similar. The Civilian Police Review Board with teeth. Creating easier processes to file complaints, enforcing. I think this in terms of the culture of policing. There, you can see on a lot of uniforms, the back of cars, the blue or thin blue line. This does not help to create trust. And then promoting police transparency. The release of disciplinary records, which, with the repeal of 50A, people are still trying to gain access to these, and passing the Right to Know Act. You can go on. The Justice Center will be presenting their views, but I think that it's important to highlight that we also support the racial bias audit and improving policies and guidelines that will lead to increased transparency regarding complaints procedures and release of disciplinary records. And then also to highlight police training, specifically that develops cultural competence, including but not limited to issues of race, but also ethnicity, immigration status, and LGBTQIA members of our community. We already heard from the Troy Coalition of Black Leaders, but we just want to, reiterate our support for many of the things that they raised. Which, so you see these calls coming from a number of people who have been included in this process and who have not. Rhea, I believe you're.
There you go, unmuted. Great. Thank you, Angela. So in looking at all of the recommendations across each of these groups, we realized that a number of the groups have recommendations that either are exactly the same or align. And so we wanted to identify where is the city of Troy on each of these. At the most fundamental level, we have to be shared in the objective that we are striving for and the problem that we are solving. And in our working group, we were on track to do research, hold listening forums, meet, provide recommendations, whatever the task at hand was, until we listened to the Time for Reckoning and heard that systemic racism was not a problem in the city of Troy. And all of us felt so completely confused and disheartened and disillusioned. Things that many of us in the community had already seen or known, but for others, it was the first time we heard that verbalized, which made us have an existential crisis of what are we doing here to solve a problem that the governor has stated exists, that we believe exists, that 11,000 people in the city of Troy showed up and marched peacefully for, and yet our own leadership in the city cannot state this on a local level. So we need every single group that you are speaking to and every group that is interested and vocal and engaged in the community needs to hear the city of Troy acknowledge that systemic racism is a problem in the city and within the department. We need to see you commit to not just reinstating past policies and old reforms that should have been enacted in 2016 or earlier, but truly reinventing how policing and community safety work by divesting from the police and investing back into the community, not just in infrastructure, not just in pools, not just in disc golf, but in actual programs for our youth, for our homeless, for immigrants, for LGBTQIA, and for those who are most marginalized and unseen and unheard. We need to see exploration and diversion programs away from criminal justice involvement to community-based treatment alternatives. We need to see the Civilian Review Board have actual subpoena power and representation. You've checked off some of that, but not all, which leaves the group without teeth, as the DSA has already stated. We need to see improvements in the complaint process by removing interaction with the police and increasing accessibility and ease of filing a complaint. This should be the simplest on this list to create. We need to see an increase in data collection and transparency. You know, with the repeal of 50A, that more groups and more people in the public will demand access to information. And we continually get resistance to that, whether filing individually with FOIL requests or going through our group with city council, the mayor, or other channels. We are constantly met with, yeah, but we'd have to hire for that. Well, then you should hire for that, because you cannot change something if you're unaware of where you stand on those different metrics. Increased data collection and transparency with your procedures, policies, disciplinary actions, and the release of those records. To date, we don't know where you stand, or we've heard that it's not an issue. Every one of us is in agreement on these. That brings us to the name of the group itself, the Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative. And as mentioned, when we were thinking about what we heard in the State of the Address, we're thrilled with a lot of the development that's happening. You know, it's great that we have access and new roads and so many improvements that are taking place, but you can't go back in time and look at reinstituting an emotionally distressed person's response training and claim that you're doing reform or reinvention. You can't reinstitute the PORB and claim that it's reform and reinvention, or rework the discipline policies to align with the group that should have already existed and also still lacks power. The reaccreditation of the department is not reform and reinvention. Still planning to use body cams is not reform and reinvention. Reworking the use of force policies to be consistent with 8 Can't Wait is a good start, but the rest of the country has already moved on from there to other more reinventive or reimagined and inventive solutions. We can recommend a number of those. We have spent at this point collectively hundreds of hours on calls. We have lots of resources, more links than you could ever read. Whatever you would like to know, please let us know. But this is all information that you have access to as well. And we are disheartened by the progress of the city and would like to see more reform and reinvention in the Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative.
So here we have an image, a headline from the news that shows that the Albany police, like, you know, the similar board that is Troy's equivalent in Albany, put out their whole report because they had been meeting this entire time. Meanwhile, when this 95-page report came out, just 5 days earlier is when our city started meeting for the very first time. This is problematic for 1,000 reasons. And this process doesn't have any access to folks who don't speak English, who might need to use American Sign Language or some other kind of language needs. The schedule for the public commenting is extremely limiting. So many folks have complained to me about issues with being able to make public comments, how they're not enabled on video calls. Technology requirements are super limiting, but I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that this board doesn't really want folks who are actually impacted to have a voice on this, because you would have invited the very groups that pushed for this in the first place. And so the task force itself is extremely lacking in diversity as far as I can see. And we already know that this whole thing is supposed to be about racial inequities. So how can we have a majority of white folks or this? Isn't that the whole heart of the problem? Don't make no sense. Okay, and just how are we actually getting to folks who are affected in Troy? It's not happening on Zoom, y'all. What's the next slide say? And so this is just to show you in comparison, our group, we're just regular people who care about this, who actually care about Black lives in Troy. And we've been meeting every 2 weeks since November 4th. We've been meeting with community members like this, cute, other task force members, social justice groups, attorneys, media. And so that's just a little bit of something as a comparison. And this is all coming out of the energy from all the things that we're talking about, but specifically the governor's recommendations say, the foregoing compels me to conclude the urgent and immediate action is needed to eliminate racial inequities in policing, to modify, modernize police strategies and practices, to improve community engagement, foster trust. Can't do that like this. Next slide. And so this question.
Thank you. All right, so thoughtful and reflective questioning is a key skill set for effective communication, and effective communication is a vital characteristic of healthy communities. So this section and the next couple slides is rooted in questioning. Thoughtful questions are designed to help teams reflect on their practice. Asking the right kinds of questions empowers teams to move forward in action through powerful ways. So our hope is that through using these carefully crafted questions, it'll allow your group to probe for deeper complexity and encourage self-reflection. So I'm a kindergarten teacher by trade, so we're going to use the I do, we do, you do method. I'm going to provide you with a thoughtful prompt, which is on the screen right now, and share some of your responses. Then I'm going to provide you with an opportunity to answer. So the question is, how can we reform and reinvent policing in the city of Troy when there's a refusal to acknowledge this problem and allocate sufficient time and resources into solving for it? So what I want you to do right now is I just want you to really unpack that question. This slide, the time for reckoning, this is the response from people that are on your committee. So Mayor Madden talked about it being a national and global problem. The police chief said that there's no systemic racism, which is just odd because you're on this group that is supposed to be fighting systemic racism. And then the council president just talking about we are one Troy, which is clearly inaccurate because some of us in Troy are facing these disproportionate outcomes and others of us are not. So we would really like for your group to be able to go back and to think about those questions. But right now, I'd really like for Mayor Madden, Chief Brian Owens, and Carmela to answer this question. Is systemic racism a problem in the city of Troy and the police department? So Mayor Madden, if you could unmute and go first.
So this is an opportunity for you to speak to us and share our concerns. This isn't a time. We want to get the information from you that you want to see included. I've made my
yes or no question.
I really appreciate you reminding me of what this session is for, but the reason that we want to ask this question is because it is really important for us to be able to provide that research that you have asked us to do, right? So if you're not answering those questions, then it's hard for us to continue to do this work, which we want to do. So if you don't feel like answering, then that's fine. Then we'll just pass it over to Carmela and see if you could answer the yes or no question, please.
Well, we're losing time on your presentation, but yes, I've made my position clear. I do believe that there is such a thing as systematic racism. I do believe it pervades most, if not all, institutions, not only in our city, but in our country and globally.
Yes or no, great.
Carmela, could you answer that, please? Yes, just yes or no is fine.
Yes.
Thank you. And Chief Owens.
I think it's more involved than a yes or no answer. And so my understanding, as I said before, I did not believe there was systemic racism within the Troy Police Department because I look at it, we don't have any decisions or policies or things that we're basing simply on race.
Okay, so I'm gonna take that as a no, because the question is just a yes or no, and I get that obviously we're not living in a vacuum, we're living in the context of the society, but it seems like you're leaning more towards no. So I think that provides us with a little bit of information of where we really need to start with this work if the chief of the committee doesn't believe that there's systemic racism within your own organization. Thank you.
So we have, just to do a time check, we've got about 2 more minutes left. We started.
Yep, we still have another slide.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can everyone see the screen? I'm not sure if I lost folks.
Yes.
Okay, great. So the next slides from here is simply that we have to determine what our role is. We still have additional meetings on our side as an organization or a group that was called to address this problem that is concerning, of course, as you can tell from the feedback that we just received. We're curious to see how your group proceeds with this, knowing the timeline and where we're at. And from us, we just wanted to say you're welcome for the time and effort that has been put in, especially by a number of the members of this group, knowing that we're doing so on top of our jobs and our families. And one of our members was not able to be here today as she's moving. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank the working group. We've already gone through the 40 minutes at this point in time. So we're going to turn this over to our next affinity group that's here with us this evening.
Thank
We
you.
have the go ahead. We have the Justice Center of Rensselaer County as the next group. Do we have someone here from the Justice Center of Rensselaer County?
I'm in the process of moving everybody over. If everybody could just
Okay.
bear with me a minute.
Okay, thanks, John.
Tamara,
Yes.
do we have all of those slides?
I don't think we've received them yet, but we definitely would like to have them so we have them for the record and we can, put them into the compilation of all the recommendations we've received so far.
Sue or Rhea, is that a possibility for you to send those to us?
Sorry, Carmela, I accidentally moved you over. I apologize.
That's
Monica,
okay.
I
I'm
texted
on my
Sue for that.
Sorry, I'm on my iPhone, so I couldn't tell.
Monica, I texted Sue to see if she would share that information with us. I couldn't take notes that quickly.
All right, thank you. Thank you to that group as well for that information.
All right, it looks as though the Justice Center of Rensselaer County, the group is coming in. We'll just give John another moment to bring everyone over.
Yes, I'm ready to begin.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Robert.
We'll have a total.
Doherty, President of the
Yes.
Council of the
Bob,
Justice.
hold on a second, Bob. Bob, could you hold on a second? I'm not done moving everybody over. Hold on a second.
All righty.
When John moves everyone over, we'll have 40 minutes for both the presentation and an opportunity for the committee to ask questions. So we are starting right about 7:30, 7:28, just so that everyone's aware of the time.
Just let me know when you'd like us to begin.
Can someone quickly just take a look at the panelists here, make sure there's nobody missing that is logged in under potentially under a different name on Zoom? I just want to make sure that I have moved everybody over in your group.
Sure, fine, John. Just let me know when you're ready.
I believe there's still a number of people missing.
Yes, Robert. Is Robert in yet?
Here's some more.
Okay.
Dalila Yen, Deborah Byers,
Nope.
Ben Thapa, Linda O'Malley again, Jessica Ashley, Cleanna Lightborn, David December, Robert Montianano, Bob Blackman, Noreen McKee, and myself.
I believe I have everybody. Some folks who have their cameras off, you may not see on Zoom if you have hide non-video participants, but I believe I've gotten everybody. I do not see David December in the list on Zoom, so I'm not able to move him over. And Cleanna, is it Cleanna Lightburn? I don't see, Born, excuse me, I don't see her either.
Okay, it's possible she's not on, John.
Is Robert on?
Yeah, I'm on. Can you hear me?
Okay,
Yes,
all right.
And can you see the slides?
Yes.
yes, it's
Okay.
on the board. We're just waiting to
Okay.
get started, Robert.
Okay.
We're all set. I've moved everybody over, so we're go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My name is Bob Doherty. I'm the president of the Justice Center in Rensselaer County. We were incorporated last July. In addition to police reform, we're active in voting rights, immigration laws and policy, all constitutional rights and civil discourse. I just read the list of our directors is posted on the monitor. Or should be, all right. 2 of the active members are immigrants. 1 is the son of an immigrant. 4 are persons of color. All are contributing citizens in civic affairs. In addition to the presenters, JCRC board members are here tonight to join in the discussion. Thank you. Can we take that down now? Can you take that down, Robert?
The slides are still stay up for the next 2
All
slides.
right, let's just
Just
proceed.
keep going.
First, let me say our group is not against the police. We fully understand and appreciate the significant, important roles police play in society. Before I continue with my introduction, I just want to say I had hoped to come here and find hope and enthusiasm for the future. And the preceding group provided that for me in a very deep way, and I so appreciate it. We saw youth, we saw intelligence, we saw accuracy, and direct communications. When serving on the City Council 2011 to 2017 and the Public Safety Chair from 2013 to 2015, I became interested in numerous settlements involving the use of force, particularly for people who were in our custody. 4 particular cases haunted me. They were the James Foley case, the Brian Hooley case, the John Larkin case, and the Archie Davis case. 1, Foley had asked the police to stop beating an immobilized African-American man on Broadway in the wee hours. Pursued and baton bashed, Foley sustained 2 serious injuries to his ankle and upper torso. 2, Hooley had written an opinion on his own Facebook page that a Policeman Heroes Award may not have been justified. The officer in question called, informing him he'd be taught what he could write on Facebook. 2 police cars arrived at his home that night after 11 o'clock. He went out to investigate. He was smashed into the sidewalk and injured. 3, Larkin accompanied his deaf aunt to St. Mary's emergency room for sutures that needed in an accidental laceration of her arm. He was lifted out of a wheelchair and smashed into the police car's fender so forcefully he broke a tooth. He was then cuffed and maced twice in the police car. And 4, Davis, a young Hudson Valley student, was standing near his own apartment and he was approached by the police. Fearful, he called his dad in Virginia and asked the police to talk to his father. He was placed on the ground, tasered twice, and had his phone stolen while his parents could hear his screams. None of these persons were doing anything that would be of concern to reasonable people. Troy's taxpayers paid a total of $330,000 in direct compensation in those 4 cases alone, and untold legal case costs. Non-disclosure clauses were signed for all except for John Larkin, who became a police violence prevention and advocate person in Boston. Police departments are command-driven. An effective, well-ordered department is dependent on discipline being certain, timely, and proportional. Active enforcement of standards assure compliance and viability of those standards. Effective police departments have strong chiefs who enjoy the confidence of the police and the citizens. As a result of numerous incidences of killing unnamed Black persons at the hands of police, including Edson, Thevenin, and Troy, and culminating with the brutal death of George Floyd, Governor Cuomo issued Executive Order 203. 203 orders police departments, along with their communities, to review policing processes and to address systemic racism and reduce police violence. JCRC has compiled police reform recommendations. Copies have been made available to all panel members and are available on our website, which is jcrc1.org. For discussion purposes, we group them into four main themes. They are culture, accountability, community, and policy. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present our recommendations and ideas of this critically important juncture for our community. A lot of hard work was done to get them to arrive here. I'd like to now turn this over to Robert Martignano, Jessica Ashley, and Deb Byers to discuss selected talking points of these recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob, and good evening. So our plan for tonight is to briefly show you the different topic areas on 2 slides that we're going to present. And then we're going to take the slides off and actually talk to you. We think that we didn't want to get you too involved in reading the slides. We actually want to talk to you. Many of our recommendations include linkages to resources, and we are going to post those linkages on our website later so you can see them. A couple of resources were talked in the earlier presentation. We've got others that we think will help your deliberation. We plan to talk for about 25 minutes, including what's already been said, and then use the remaining time for question and answers. We think it's important to get a dialogue. So first, I want to start with Miss Jessica Ashley, who's going to talk about culture. And here's our 2 slides: culture, accountability, community, and then policies. And again, these are already listed on our recommendations that we've sent out.
All righty. Good evening. My name is Jessica Ashley. I was born and raised in the city of Troy, and have been very active in community issues and concerns over the many decades that I've lived in Troy. I want to share with you, first of all, that as Bob stated, we appreciate the police and what their purpose is. I want to state but that when they are not living up to their purpose, and they have brought about a culture contrary to the reasons for their existence, then there are issues. I've witnessed many things firsthand in regards to the culture that exists in the Troy Police Department. And it was racially based abuses, nothing short of torture with some of the beatings that I've witnessed firsthand. And a culture of individuals thinking that they are above the law. And because they wear a badge and wear a police uniform, that they cannot be held accountable for their actions. There is without a doubt systemic racism, and anyone that doesn't see that at this time, I hope before all the presentations are over, they will. Racial bias. We do have recommendations for many of the problems that exist on our Troy Police Department. And our hope is to bring about recommendations that the Troy Police Department, that the City Council, the mayor will take seriously. This problem and these problems are entrenched, and it's long overdue that we address the issues in a serious manner, and take in consideration that a march like what occurred this past summer with Black Lives Matter happened because there are thousands and tens of thousands of individuals who are not pleased with the fact that we have been sticking our heads in the sand and denying that these problems exist. Our recommendations, racial bias audit, is to conduct independent and external racial bias audit of the Troy Police Department that assesses and monitors the Troy Police Department internal operations and policies and procedures. I want to stop there for a minute. One of the problems that I, again, have experienced firsthand is when a person has experienced abuse by a police officer, going to the police department and trying to make a complaint. That is practically impossible. I know firsthand because I've been with the individuals who are afraid to go and make a complaint. I've been with them, and some of the experiences we've had are, well, you can take a form and fill it out and give it back to us, or you can fill out the form, but you can't have a copy, or you have to wait till the sergeant on that shift comes up, or when all that has been accomplished, the complaint is lost. The department does not, and when it comes to data that may have shown some of the problems that exist, much of it will not show up or does not exist because we have not been able to get complaints through so that data can be tracked and followed through. So there needs to be an internal, external, there needs to be audit. There needs to be that done so that it is made plain to the public and officials that be what the problems are and how they can be addressed. If we're not allowed to bring to the powers that be the concerns and the issues that we have with Troy police officers whose conduct is unbecoming, then the problem will never be resolved because the complaints are not getting through. Another issue is, and I'll go on to read, Citizens Review Board with subpoena, investigative, and recommendations as well. Subpoena power for a review board is critical. I personally was on a board over 20 years ago. We had no subpoena power. There was nothing, and there were concerns that we had. We weren't able to question the officers who were involved in the investigations. Our findings were squashed and never heard of or mentioned again, and it just had no teeth to it. We were told that the union would not allow us to have that. One of the concerns is, how long will it be that the union, the police union, will dictate and determine what is best for the city of Troy? Right. The governance is a bit questionable there. Create appropriate policies and release of all police officers' disciplinary records, as well as part of the repeal of Section 50-A. If in fact that if we're serious about reform, then you can't be hiding information from the public. It is a dangerous thing, and it's a dangerous practice. And I have to say, it is a dangerous practice to hold back information when you have a violent officer who has a history of being violent, and you refuse to not only address it, but you actually hide it. Edson Thevenin's death was a result of behavior that was squashed and hidden to the public until Edson Thevenin was killed. And that is a young man that should have not did nothing to warrant a death sentence in the city of Troy. Another problem that we have had, I want to mention also, is that the dogs, the Canine Unit, the dogs have been used for other than drug discovery. They've been used for other than chasing down a suspect. The dogs have been used for, it appears sometimes, just because an officer chose to allow the dog to bite a suspect that has already been subdued. My question is, why do we have the dogs? Why is there a canine unit? Is it really necessary? The use of force, it has become a problem that could be very easily addressed if there is accountability. If there is no accountability, then officers will not plumb the line, if you will. Many, Mr. Doherty mentioned about a Davis case that I personally witnessed. I was an eyewitness to that incident, that situation. That there were 4 young men that were allegedly jaywalking that resulted in that young man being beaten severely. There were over 10 police cars there that were involved with that incident. Numerous cops were beating on this young man. The use of force had no place. There was no act of violence. I was watching the entire situation. I actually videotaped it. But again, because there's no accountability, there is no one that you can turn to address that behavior. The police officers continue to flaunt, if you will, that kind of behavior, especially when they know that there's no one that they're going to be answering to. With that said, I will turn it over to a next person who is going to be presenting.
You're on mute, Deb.
Thank you. So thank you, Jessica. And I just wanted to say that I'm grateful for all of the complementary efforts around the community to address these issues. And I'm grateful for the powerful voices about things that we all need to know. We all need to know about it and work on changing that. And I do appreciate the convening of this collaborative to bring the efforts together and work for change. And I expect change will happen. And I appreciate that you've asked the Justice Center to weigh in. So I've been asked to talk about some of the community recommendations, especially transparency and communication. So all of the reports from around the country, from reform efforts, stress how much transparency and communication will build trust. And we all know how important, we looked at the first presentation about how important trust is when working with the community. So we do think, this again, low-hanging fruit was used as a metaphor before, but we think it would be really low-hanging fruit to just make complaint forms available and fileable online. They should be accompanied by instructions that are clear and include information about what happens with a complaint once it's filed and a way to check. So in addition, we think it would be helpful to supply paper complaint forms in public spaces around the community, like in the library. And again, there should be instructions and procedures about what happens, what you can expect to have happen when you file a complaint. We also think that trust is built by perception of procedural justice. And to this end, we would really recommend, we think it would be helpful to provide a short user-friendly guide to common interactions between citizens and police. You know, what to expect and what to do. We think this should be accompanied by a list of citizen rights and police prerogatives. I mean, it's important for people to understand what's okay and what's not. And we think that it would be helpful to use this for joint community and police training. It would be helpful for both the citizens and the police to know what's okay and what to expect and how to avoid escalation of situations. In this area of transparency, we reiterate, like the others, that crime statistics should be readily available in a clear and easily understood format. They shouldn't have to be, it shouldn't have to be a FOIL request. They should be available and periodically updated. It'd be helpful to have it on the website, but it should be a matter of public record. So we also would recommend developing a LEAD program for the city of Troy. And that would be, for those who don't know, it's a law enforcement assisted diversion program or something like it, you know, some way to divert people, you know, youthful offenders, people with mental health problems, low impact first offenders, perhaps into something other than the criminal court, put them instead into some sort of harm reduction, intensive case management program to help get them back into being productive members of society. So this isn't some kind of, this has been tried all over the country. It started about 10 years ago. It's not a loosey-goosey kind of idea. It is primarily led and resourced by the Public Defenders Association on a national level. We'll have links to this available on the website so that you can look. But we think it's important to know that it has been tried all over and with varying success, but it does mean that we could learn from a lot of different places and try to make it really work here. We also know that mental health intervention is assigned to the police in Troy. This can be problematic sometimes in how people perceive this kind of service, but we think on both sides of it, but we suggest including trained mental health professionals in crisis response teams. We think that would go a long way to alleviating difficulties. And now Robert is going to talk about some policies, some specific policies.
So again, thank you for inviting us to present today. As Deborah said, I'm going to be talking about policy, and I'll start with the use of body and dashboard cameras. You know, we know that Troy's moving toward that, and we applaud that. We think it's very important. And it's very important, and it's very overdue. But we also know that just having the cameras in place isn't enough. And we think that, and we recommend, in addition to obviously having the cameras, that there needs to be an appropriate policy put in place, and that policy needs to include sanctions when the cameras are turned off. As Deborah said, we're going to have on our website at the end of the night links to a number of things, and one of the links that I want to put on here is an ACLU proposed policy around use of cameras, because I think it's important, and as Deborah said, about transparency. And I think we need to think about not only what policies we put in place, but how we communicate those policies to the general public and to the community. We know that cameras both protect the police officers and the public and the community, and ultimately it reduces ambiguity during an interaction. So there's no he said, she said about something, that is pretty well documented. And again, as I said, we're going to include that resource on our website. Another policy recommendation is updating Troy Police Policy 601 and 602 on the use of physical force and on the use of deadly force. We are recommending a use of continuum of force and de-escalation as outlined in the National Institute of Justice, among other places. The The mayor identified 8 Can't Wait, that it's on there. It's on Campaign Zero. It's also, I believe, been talked about in the Human Rights Watch. So I think a number of organizations have really put it together and have talked about these techniques. And the National Institute of Justice, as well as the Campaign Zero, I'll have links to later. We recommend under this policy the total elimination of the use of the carotid restraint. We believe it's too dangerous and as we have seen, too deadly when not properly used. As I read the choice policy, I realized it was too subjective as it's written and ultimately opens the door to too much interpretation. We also recommend eliminating shooting at moving vehicles. And as Ms. Ashley talked about, we recommend the use of police canine unit be reviewed, revised, and possibly eliminated. We are aware of the misuse of these animals, especially against police of color, and it's important that we really review that practice. If it's decided that the canine unit needs to be kept, as well as what we've talked about in other ways, we need to have a policy in place that makes sense, that's transparent to the public. Finally, I want to talk about the right to know legislation. And I know you've heard a number of these recommendations with a group before us. So I think we're all kind of saying the same thing. The right to know legislation helps promote communication by describing how police should identify themselves during any interaction with the public. So for you who have not been familiar with this, it was enacted in New York City in 2018 and over the last summer in Poughkeepsie and in Newburgh, so that various municipalities are implementing it. It's also being currently proposed in the state legislature to cover state police. It ensures that police always identify themselves, including their badge number, a brief description of why they are stopping, detaining, or arresting the individual. You know, all too often, you know, we see people being approached, they're not really explained why they're being stopped, and it starts escalating a situation that doesn't need to be escalated. And we think that having right to know legislation would eliminate some of that. And part of that legislation, some people have implemented, is use of a business card. So if the officer wants to say, if you have any questions, here's my badge number, here's my name, here's my supervisor, here to contact us. So there's no issue with who you talk to and when. Again, I'm going to include a link on this on our website. So finally, Deborah's going to continue with a discussion on our recommendations around training.
And again, these are just highlights. And you know, training, of course, it's an important part of protecting officers and protecting the public. And that is an important issue. We know the officers face danger every day, and we want to ensure that you know, we have the best, safest force and the best and safest community. And so, you know, training protects the officers and the public, but it also can drive and support change. And so we think it's important to consider the training programs now. One thing, of course, is that policing in a democratic society requires training officers to protect human rights, preserve dignity, both their own and that of whoever they're confronting, and also to strive for public safety for all. We believe that there should be specific units in conjunction with the racial bias audit, that there should be training that deals with procedural justice, with implicit bias, with issues of racism, ethnicity, mental health, and LGBTQIA+ issues. We also think that there should be training in specific de-escalation techniques. And we also, you know, obviously, there's going to be training needed on any procedural and policy changes adopted as part of this process. And again, I'd say the specific de-escalation techniques and also specific techniques to intervene with another officer who's using excessive force. And here I know that the Rochester incident with the 9-year-old girl was brought up in a previous meeting. But just think, if there had been effective intervention from another officer in that situation, that travesty wouldn't have happened. And so it's important to give our policemen the tools to intervene in a way that works with their fellow officers and is protection to all of them, to protect them from doing things that aren't okay. So we would also say that whenever possible, it's good to engage the community in trainings. This has been found around the country, opening trainings to the public, allowing observers, and training together. You know, some things might be, and then using community members as trainers in enforcement of tactics. You know, what are the perceptions of those? How can we affect levels of trust? What are the areas for dialogue? And, you know, we'll go back to that training guide on what to expect from interactions with the police. We think that could be a really handy tool and a great way to train. So thank you for your time and your interest, and we're open to questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And we have about 10 minutes for questions. And the way that we'd like to do this is, if a committee member is interested in asking a question or wants some clarifying information, if you could raise your hand and we'll start a queue. And then if we could have one member of the Justice Center of Rensselaer County respond to any question. Do any committee members have a question? All right, Kevin.
First of all, I want to thank everybody for the excellent presentation, and I also appreciated the information coming ahead of time. So I was able to look at some of this information, and I'd like to be able to learn more. And specifically, Jessica, I really appreciated your sharing, and thank you very much for sharing very difficult experiences that you've witnessed. So the question I have is a very specific question, you know, under 11D, the de-escalating potentially violent situations, the use of continuum matrix. Can you fill me in a little bit more, give me examples of that? And I'll also follow up with, you know, the links that you provide afterwards, but just as a understanding of what the de-escalation process is.
So this is Robert. I will I'll address that. So what a number of places recommend is a 4-step process that goes through just kind of standing and talking to ultimately through and I guess I'm going the other way, I'm going to escalation, but there's steps to go through when you're confronting somebody or you're in a situation that says, when something is happening, here's what you should be thinking about, here's what you should be doing. So do you need to escalate all the way to pulling out a taser when maybe a firm, you know, hand on the shoulder or a communication makes sense? So again, as the mayor pointed out, 8 Can't Wait has it listed. I'm going to list the justice. What was the thing? Campaign Zero has a link to it. And I'm also going to send out the National Institute of Justice that all talk about how police can go through their interaction with people so that they're not escalating out of hand when it's a mere stop for jaywalking or something like that.
All right, thank you. I'd like to see those links. Thank you.
I will make sure I send them out.
All right, Chris, we'll go over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I also want to really thank everybody for such a thorough and detailed set of recommendations. I mean, you obviously did a ton of work, and I really appreciate it. I wonder if you could share with us if you have any knowledge of who would do a police racial bias audit. Are there examples of this you could give us that have been done? Are there, who does it? Bob?
There was just one done in Albany.
And one done in Niskayuna.
And so,
And who did it?
I'm
What are
sorry,
their-
I don't know. That was in the TU 2 days ago, but the name of the firm that did it was listed. It's an external firm and they do it on a national basis. But the findings were, had great gravitas and wound up on the front page of the paper. The Albany data has been gathered and part of their processes for almost 2 years. So, but again, it's an external firm. And I think relying on internal data may not be as valuable as objective surveys and studies. Thank you.
I can also, the Albany one is available on their website, though it wasn't easily found, and I also have a PDF of it I can forward, if that would help.
Just a note to the committee, I actually sent the full process over to Tamara and the mayor. I pulled it up on the Albany website.
Okay.
Kathy, you're up.
Thank you, and I want to thank everyone for their thoughtful presentation this evening. I am particularly interested in how you envision mental health counselors responding. I think you used the phrase crisis response teams, and I'm curious as to what you've envisioned in that regard.
so I think that there are models to be had around the country. And I would think that anything that you do would have to be informed by that. But it seems like sometimes those mental health calls are ones where if you had somebody on tap that you could call to go out to, especially if you're picking somebody up to who's become a threat to themselves or to others, that if you had a mental health professional involved, that transition from wherever the person is to get them help would be easier and safer and more humane. And so I guess what I envision there is that you'd have somebody who would be available on a regular basis, available on call.
On call to the police department to access?
Unless part of the reimagining of the Troy Police Department involves that you would set up specific response teams that would go on the mental health calls that would be different than the police. But at the moment, the police are the ones who are trained to respond to emergencies. And often, I will say that when I've seen those, it's been good, but I do know in the actual crisis situation where they're actually going to do take somebody from where they are to an inpatient setting, it would have been better if there were a trained professional involved.
To add on to what Deb says, there are cities here in the capital region that have mobile crisis units. One illustration of it is if we ask a police officer, how do you feel when you respond to a call that involves mental health crisis or domestic violence? And the answer usually is stress. I would say that this is an effective way to have somebody who's professionally trained to handle this and allow the police to do more police-like things, which seems to be in everybody's interest.
Tamara?
Yes.
Hi, it's Carmela. I wear another hat in the state legislature, and I just so everyone's aware, the legislators from Rochester actually introduced a bill exactly to what you're talking about, which would establish state and regional councils and regional response units for mental health emergencies relating to certain powers of peace officers and police officers handling mental health emergencies. And that was in direct response to the Rochester incident. I'll give you a bill number if folks want to look it up. It's Senate 4814, and there's an assembly sponsor also, and there's bipartisan support for this legislation.
Is there any funding associated with it, Carmela?
Let's see, I have the bill. Let's see what the fiscal. A lot of times, I hate to say it, they're in the bill, they won't have the fiscal, they'll have to address in the budget. But if there's bipartisan support, potentially they could put money in the upcoming budget to appropriate funds for this purpose. So yeah,
Okay.
but it's a multi-page bill, but I would encourage folks to take a look at it. And if it does have legs, they can certainly put funding in the upcoming budget.
Okay, that's good to bring into the conversation. I think we have time for about one more question, if anyone has another question. Okay. Noreen?
Yeah. Yes, this is really for the chief. I just wonder, do you have a sense, I have no sense, do you have a sense of the percentage of calls involving mental health crises that the police have to respond to? I mean, how much of a problem is it? My sense is that it's a big problem, so if you could clarify that.
Thank you. Last meeting, Commissioner Coons had indicated we had over 700 calls. We looked it up and it's for 2020 and 2019, we're just over 900 calls for mental health specific for each of those years. So it is significant. And those are the calls that we're responding to, transporting. So as we talked about before, the mental health, the 941, 945, 960s. And that doesn't even get into other calls that might be more criminal in nature, but certainly there's a mental health component to that, not just a specific exclusive mental health call. So over 900 each year for the last 2 years, and then I'll have to dig up more for prior years.
And do you have a sense of the percentage?
Of the total calls for service?
Mhm.
I don't, I could have that figured out, but that's significant. I mean,
Mhm.
900 calls are just one type of an incident, significant.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'd like to take an opportunity to say thank you to the Reimagine Troy Community Justice Services Working Group and the Justice Center of Rensselaer County for joining us and sharing your recommendations and your thoughts with the committee. We appreciate having this time for listening and hearing from you. And at this point in time, we're going to switch over to a time for the committee to do some debrief and to discuss what we've heard. So thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
If everyone could just bear with me again as I migrate folks over, you'll be prompted to rejoin as an attendee in the meeting.
Okay, so we had an opportunity this evening to hear from two different affinity groups. Again, the purpose of this time is around listening to different community members and hearing what recommendations are we hearing often, Where do we need more information to bring into the committee? So this is an opportunity now for us to share reflections on what we've heard. So we can go ahead, if you want to just raise your hand, we can just start the conversation. Okay, Stacy.
Hello.
Hi, Stacy.
Hi. So for me, this evening, I feel like I'm hearing two different types of conversations. One is about emotionally distraught people that the police have to respond to and how they go about responding to those calls. And the other part is I'm hearing that, no, it's not about emotionally distraught people. It's about how the police are mishandling Black and brown people when they have to respond to a call or deal with them for whatever the reason. And, you know, that's what I got out of tonight's meeting. For me, I don't know if, you know, I hope everybody's comfortable enough to have these conversations, but for me, in hearing the latter, I would really be interested at some point in looking at what the police department's organization chart looks like and where those Black and brown officers fall in. Because I think I said it before, it's so important that you have police officers or people that are in decision-making positions that represent the people. I know that, you know, there were questions towards the police chief and that it appears that you don't think that there's an issue at all with systemic racism. For me, in hearing that, I almost feel like you may not understand because maybe you can't, maybe you're not looking at things from a different set of lenses. And maybe it's not intentional, but that's what it sounds like to me. I thought the conversations of everybody that I heard were well thought out in what they said. And I also, someone mentioned something about, you know, when things happen, instead of bringing it to regular court, bring it to like a diversion type court. And I actually heard about that. And I thought that was also, I heard it was successful. So I think, you know, I thought that was great. But I just feel like tonight, especially tonight, and hearing both sides and hearing, you know, in general, that it just seems like it's just two different conversations for me. So that's what I got out of tonight, really.
Thank you, Stacy. We can get some of that information and bring it into the committee. Police chief.
Tamara, thank you. I would agree both were strong and powerful presentations. I just maybe would like to try to clarify a little bit. When I'm talking about the Troy Police Department, I'm talking about the Troy Police Department now. I don't view systemic racism, and maybe it is my understanding of it. I look at it like we have no policies, we have no procedures, we are not making decisions, we're not taking official actions based on race. And maybe I do look at things differently. I'm not judging people or viewing people based on race or the color of their skin. And I'm not for 1 second suggesting that racism does not exist in the world. It doesn't exist in Troy. But I guess I'm more narrowly focusing on the official system, the system part of the Troy Police Department. And so that's where I make those comments from. I can certainly try to learn more and try to better understand and appreciate other viewpoints if that's a factor in consideration. But I just want to try to clarify that. That's where I'm coming from.
Thank you, Chief. Deputy Mayor.
Hi, everybody. And I want to thank both of those committees for coming together, and organizations actually, and presenting. I do have, I guess I need to explore a couple things. First, I want to say back under Mayor Liu, I believe, and Chief or Dan, you might remember this, there was a diversion court for youth, actually, and they had done it actually over at Sage. I think they kicked it off. Davia Collington was really big in that. So I don't know what happened with that. I don't know if it was lack of funding or lack of motivation or something. I know it was a lot. So I think maybe we should like just look at that. I'm not saying to bring it back, but just see what the challenges or obstacles were to make that sustainable.
Hey,
I did
Monica,
not know.
Yeah,
go
a
ahead.
sec. So with the raise the age, it's pretty much all been diverted anyway. You know, I mean, so that has taken care of a lot of that. Youth court is what you're referring to. And that never really took off because the cases had to be given to us through probation, and they were just having difficulty being able to give us cases. Like we weren't dealing with truancy or a lot of the minor cases, like shoplifting case or something like that, is really handled by the, say, the supermarket or whatever, civilly now. They don't even really call the police for that. It's the kid that the parents are called or whatever, and they get a fine, and they're told not to come back to the store and so on. And a lot of those things are handled that way. The youth court was only going to hear cases of violations, and that in itself was difficult because if you're under 16 at the time, if you were under 16, you couldn't be charged with a violation anyway. So it really, I mean, it was a great thought, and it got some kids involved, but it never really took off, unfortunately.
Okay. Thank you. That was, so it was, I just remember it was a very peer-to-peer kind of situation, which I know back growing up in the 80s and the 90s, that was something that was a big initiative back then, especially with drugs and alcohol kind of thing. The canine units, this is the first I've really heard that there was a suggestion of an alternate use. So I think maybe just looking at the canine policy, I do know that we use them actively in, other situations. And so I just, that was a new thing. Just real quickly, and again, I know that it's some of the presentation from the Reimagine Troy Community Justice Services Group, or the group. One of the recommendations they have is for removing the SROs in the school. And I know that's a national or maybe a very New York State initiative through the DSA. And I guess I would want to know maybe just some information from our school districts and the perception of the SROs in the schools, as well as with those youth, because I think that there's been very positive interactions with them, and there's actually been some really good support with that. So I guess on a local Troy-based program, I would want to see if there was more information and more dialogue around that, just because I do know that they've been very successful, but this could be something just out of a larger rhetoric that's just being brought down to us, but I just needed to see if there was any more information on that.
We'll be happy to provide that. Yes, our SROs are celebrated by the superintendents of both school districts, and they do a wonderful job. The kids interact great with them, and it is certainly not a classroom to the jail cells like is being talked about across the nation. Maybe that's happening in some places, but it isn't happening here in Troy, and that's what we're discussing, is what's going on here in Troy, and those SROs are really doing a great job. So, but we'll talk more about it.
Okay, and if the committee has any more information specific to that and the call for that specific to Troy, if they could provide that when they send their documents over to us, that would be great too. Thank you.
All right, let's go to the mayor and then to Stacy.
Why don't you go ahead and take Stacy first, and then I'll wrap
Stacy?
up if we're ready.
I just wanted to really say that actually I worked with SROs before in Albany County, and I thought that was a great program because it wasn't like they were there for punitive reasons. Sometimes they got a chance to know the kids and the families and to redirect them so that they would so that they would change the situation so that something negative could be turned into something positive. So I don't know where anything negative would come in, because I actually worked with them. Maybe not over here, but Albany County, but I've never heard anything really negative about an SRO. I just wanted to say that. And the other thing is what I wanted to say to police chief is if like when you were just explaining about systemic racism, I think if maybe you had explained it the way you just did, I think that maybe it would have been perceived differently a little bit.
Actually, Stacy, I think he did explain it that way when he said it tonight. He said the exact same thing both times.
I mean, well, when I heard him saying it, I took like, oh, there's no systemic racism. But when you started talking about, when you were starting to explain to us in the committee, it seemed like it was different. Like, I just think it would have been I took it differently, I guess.
Can I follow up on that just for a second? Is that okay?
Sure.
Just to say that I was actually glad to hear Chief Owens to explain it that way, because it helped me understand that why he wasn't saying what I think is almost universally accepted now, that there's structural racism everywhere, which I've said several times. I think if we maybe could agree on a common definition of what structural racism is, maybe we would all be in the same place.
I agree.
Chris, I'd like to just follow up on that, because that was something we heard from another presenter, was having some definitions around community policing, around systemic racism. Some of those things could be important for the work that we're doing as a committee.
Yeah.
Mayor, do you want to go and then?
Sure. Just very quickly, I think one of our challenges is lack of transparency. And I don't mean it in a negative light. I mean it in a way that we are not talking enough about what we actually are doing. We're not talking enough, for example, about the value of the SRO program, and being clear that it's not a disciplinary program. And that in fact, it helps create relationships between young kids in the community and police officers, and they see them as a resource, as an asset in the community. But also when it comes to training, there were a lot of ideas for training. There were a lot of ideas relative to use of force that are things that are already in place and have been in place for some time. So I think we need, for the benefit of the committee, I think we need to carve out a block of time so that we can talk directly to the chief, the deputy chief, about the training protocols, about what is required, how we choose police officers, how we support them, and it might alleviate some of the misconceptions that are out there. So I'll work with others to build something into the schedule so that we can hear about what is actually going on under the current leadership.
Thank you. DA Donnelly, I think you were next.
Sorry about that. Forgot to unmute myself. I just wanted to say I'm seeing a theme with each of the affinity groups, obviously looking from my perspective and how I fit into this puzzle with respect to diversion and reentry. And we talked a lot about reentry the other night, but with reference to diversion, I think that's really something that I would like to dig into with stakeholders, something that I think would be a really beneficial program for Troy. Dan mentioned youth court. I worked with that years ago in the town of East Greenbush. It's a great program for a first-time offender who is shoplifting or something of that nature, but it's really not the type of program that's going to turn lives around. We need something a little bit deeper, something that we need to examine as probably a pre-arrest diversion program, I think would be the best thing that a committee like this could get behind. We have been working in my office over the last 2 years on a program that I think is really something that would be helpful to the community. Unfortunately, as you may know, there've been a few curveballs for all of us over the last 2 years, including this pandemic. So it's kind of slowed down our progress, but we do have a framework laid out. We did have one preliminary meeting. I think there's some people here on the call who were part of that. So I'm really hoping that we can dig into that. And I hope as we're thinking about the recommendations we're going to make and the things that we're going to be doing as a committee, that we think long and hard about some type of pre-arrest diversion that I think could take a burden off of the police department and could really reroute some people in the right direction. It's going to start very small, of course. I don't expect that we can turn the whole population around, but if we can take 5 or 6 young kids and point them in the right direction, I think we would all feel like we've made some amazing progress. So if we can just think about that, I don't know if we should be having separate meetings or something, but I'm going to reach out to a few people and see if we can't come up with some type of commitment that we can maybe make as part of our recommendation. And
Thank you. Let's go to the council president, deputy mayor, and then over to Kevin.
Yes, thank you, Tamara. Mayor, I'm so glad that you pointed that out because this evening, as we were moving along and the SROs are brought up and Canine, I think it's important to talk about some of the programs that were mentioned and some of the things maybe that are working. I am concerned as we move along here of the morale of our department. We have an incredibly hardworking, dedicated department, and I just don't want that lost only because obviously they're out there, they're working their hearts out. And I just want that momentum in terms of our support for them and providing those tools and talking not just about the things that are wrong, but some of the things that are going right. And I just think that that's very important moving along. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, and then over to Kevin.
Low-hanging fruit, I think, is this complaint form. I'm really going to be honest about that. In today's technology, I know that there are certain requirements that we look for now, like if somebody comes to City Hall and fills out a complaint form. But I think there's ways that we can probably reach around those and figure that out. So I think that's a easy thing to be attained. And again, going back to Renee's suggestion on the very first meeting, there's a lot of things in here that could be addressed with a communications plan and some sort of, the policies that Bob had talked about and making sure the policies are known. So I think that, going back to what the council president just said too, is making sure that we talk about what we do really well and make sure that the information is presented.
Kevin.
So yeah, I've found the same themes in the several affinity groups and in the public, and I really appreciated Jerry's presentation of trust and how he broke that down to transparency, respect, unity, service, and truth. And I love that in so many different ways. And I also need to say that words do matter, and I think we do need to have. I believe that structural racism is pervasive in nearly all of our institutions, and that's okay to acknowledge. And I think we need to acknowledge on some level that's happening implicitly, if not based on legacy. And I think that trust, and what I'm hearing from so many of the speakers, is that concern. And some of them are saying mistrust about process, about enforcement, about oversight, about communications. And I think that we should be hearing the definitions that they're bringing to us and responding to those definitions when we answer the questions about systemic racism, for instance. Time and time again, the complaint process and making that more available to people, as well as oversight. And I talk about the oversight committee all the time with subpoena powers, and that's a whole issue certainly that I need to learn so much about. But again, that goes back to what Jerry was talking about: trust, transparency, respect, truth. And there were a lot of things that we heard, and again, it's from individuals' perspective, but talking about they believe there's a lack of transparency from their experiences, and that things haven't been exposed. And things like a racial bias audit might be a really good thing to expose what we haven't recognized yet. So I found, these past 2 weeks really powerful, and there are a lot of people who have a lot of important things to say.
Thank you, Kevin. Let's go to Councilman Zalewski, and then why don't we wrap up with anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak in this debrief, if you're interested in commenting.
Thanks, Tamara. I'll be very fast. First of all, I just wanted to thank both groups I was attempting to take notes on the various recommendations from both of our affinity groups tonight, and by my count, I think it's over 24 recommendations if you break them down. There was some overlap between both groups. My suggestion, and this kind of piggybacks on what the mayor was talking about, is that we take all of the recommendations, enumerate them very clearly, and then start placing them into some buckets. One bucket would be those things that we are already doing, but that we're not advertising that we're doing them well enough, like the mayor was talking about. And then the deputy mayor was talking about low-hanging fruit. Those recommendations that are easy, that we should be doing. We haven't done it yet, but we can do it, such as the complaint form, disciplinary records. I've talked to police officers. I know the disciplinary records. I talked about this at the last meeting. There's a lot of officers that want the disciplinary records released as well, because they want the public to see that they are generally doing a good job, and that there's, it's not like, our officers are constantly being disciplined. I think, some of these issues of discipline might be something like, an officer was wearing a tattoo, and that's against policy, and that's, that would be released to the public. But, it's good for both sides. It's good for the public to see those, and it's good for our officers, so that the public doesn't believe that there's all these things being hidden by the police departments. That's awesome for transparency, and the word transparency came up numerous times in both tonight and our previous meetings. So the low-hanging fruit, the body cameras, I know it's already in the works. Let's get our timelines out with that and get that done. And then the third bucket would be those issues that are longer term, that would require putting together new policies, new plans, new programs. And then, once we get all of these recommendations into these buckets, we can start, working through them. Again, informing the public on those recommendations that are already happening, taking care of some of the quick ones that we can do, and then putting together a plan for moving forward on the longer term goals.
Thank you, Ken. Renee, Starlita, Laura, I don't think we've heard from you in the debrief. Just to give you a chance if you have anything you want to share right now, no pressure.
Okay, I just wanted to comment on what Carmela said about morale. And I just want to hope that we're portraying the message that doing this reform piece is not to tear anything down, but to make our community better. And we want to make sure that the officers have what they need to do a good job. And if we need to augment what they do, need to do a good job, then that's what we are here to kind of hash out and make better. We want them to do a good job. We want the community to be successful. And I've listened to some of the conversation going back and forth, and with the discussion about systemic racism, I got a little uncomfortable about coming up with definitions or taking someone else's definition. Systemic racism has been defined, and I think we should stick with the definition of what it is. And if we need to delve into it and understand what that really means, I think that's what we should do. Just keep the language clear because it's already been defined, and just work with that going forward. And I think that's all I have to say at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee.
And for me, I would piggyback off of what Ken had just said, is to put things into buckets of what we are doing, what we need to do. But the common goal for all of us is to make Troy an inclusive Troy, a transparent Troy, a more welcoming Troy. And if we're all moving in that direction, then it's gonna happen. We're all gonna have these uncomfortable conversations. We need to have these uncomfortable conversations. But like Renee said, to redefine what systemic racism is, that's not our place and we can't do that. It's already been defined, and we have to just dive in deeper in what what that definition is. But I just really want us to really focus on transparency, good and bad. You know, we have to have some deep conversations, period. That's going to be it's going to be hard. But we have to make sure that we are in a safe space and that everyone is okay to have these conversations. You know, if we're going to grab this low bearing fruit as far as incident reports, there's other incidents that, you know, that high fruit that we have to get to as well. And, you know, but both Infinity groups did an amazing job with presenting, and I feel like they've done a good part of our job on what we're here to do, and to give them that credit and to really look into seeing where those resources are going to come from time to money, employment opportunities. It's just, you know, they did an amazing job presenting tonight. And, you know, I'm sorry, I'm out of breath. I'm in pain right now, but overall, like I said, I think they did an amazing job, and the incident report is something that we definitely can work on now. We have a lot of technology that can get that done in a very reasonable time. So.
Okay, thank you, Starlita. I think at this point, if there's not anything else, I'm going to turn it over to the mayor. Is there anyone else that has anything that they need to share for this evening? Okay.
Well, once again, I'd like to thank everybody, not just for the time that they've committed so far and the time they'll commit going forward, but also for your insight, your ability to ask difficult questions, to talk about things that may be uncomfortable. Although I think less is uncomfortable than I imagined. So again, just thank you. Hang in there. It seems large right now and disjointed, but you know, we're working, trying to distill things down to pick up on Ken's notion that if we could get things in the buckets, it might feel more manageable. I don't want to go too far with that until we've heard from everybody, because I want to make sure that our categories are the right categories and that we're able to collect everything. And so yes, we should be thinking about it, but I just don't want to commit anything too far at this point. We still have 3 meetings to go. We're only halfway done. So hang in there. Great comments, great questions, and we shall carry on. Thank you again.